All right, listen, love him or hate him, it's must-watch TV every time Jake Paul steps back into the ring, and he does so this week. Also, we're getting closer and closer to potentially the greatest ever to walk into a UFC cage, making his return. That's Jon Jones against Cyril Gane. That's creeping up on us faster and faster, but before we get to both of those things, a couple things that I wanted to touch on that didn't quite make the cut, we're calling it the bottom of the pot. So what was at the bottom of the pot for this week on the Morning Brew? So Netflix announced that they struck a deal with the NFL, and it's for a little docu-series that they're going to call Quarterback, in which we'll see sort of a behind-the-scenes look at a couple of NFL quarterbacks, whether it's on the field or off the field, and even kind of in their personal lives at their houses, or at least that's what it says. And I thought it was interesting who they chose to single out for this show. Patrick Mahomes, Kirk Cousins, and Marcus Mariota. Now that may leave you thinking, how did they land on those three? How did you get Patrick Mahomes, which makes sense, sort of the face of the league, but then Kirk Cousins and Marcus Mariota? And, I think they're trying to pick, they want to get the full spectrum of quarterbacks, right? So Patrick Mahomes, the cream of the crop, the face of the league, like we said. And then Kirk Cousins, who's sort of a right in the middle tier kind of guy. He's looked at as sort of a league average quarterback. And then Marcus Mariota, a former, top 2 pick, who's now kind of bounced around a little bit and seems like, he doesn't necessarily have his job secured. Who knows how longer he'll be in the league. So I think it's a good contrast of players, to see kind of what the life is like from the cream of the crop, top-notch guys, all the way down to the maybe kind of clinging on to their career guys. So that was super cool. And, anytime, especially as a sports fan, anytime Netflix partners with any kind of league, whether it's the Drive to Survive stuff with F1, they're doing Breakpoint with tennis now. There's a golf one that just came out. So I'm sure this quarterback thing is going to be really, really interesting. And how about a couple of the Edmonton Oilers breaking personal milestones? It's no secret who it is. Connor McDavid, the face of the league, and Leon Draisaitl, sometimes left in the shadow of McDavid, but still, at worst, a top 5 player in hockey. McDavid reached his 800th point of his career on the same day that Draisaitl recorded his 700th point. So huge milestones for both of those guys. McDavid himself became I believe it was 5th fastest ever to get to 800 points. He's behind Wayne Gretzky, Mario Lemieux, Mike Bossy, and Peter Stastny. So elite company there. And as far as the players currently in the league, no one has done it faster. There's a lot of all-time greats still playing right now. The likes of Sidney Crosby, Alex Ovechkin, Steve Stamkos, Patrick Kane, none of them have reached that milestone faster than Connor McDavid. The closest competition was Sidney Crosby. It took him 571 games, where McDavid was able to do it in 545 games. Now, both of those players have dealt with some injuries, but nonetheless, something you've got to note. McDavid, one of the all-time greats, Draisaitl, no slouch either. Both of them, congrats. 800 points for McDavid, 700 for Draisaitl. And then finally, something that I thought was a little bit funny, a little relevant still, since the Super Bowl has just recently concluded. Philadelphia Eagles wide receiver A.J. Brown came out and said that everything he knew while he was a member of the Tennessee Titans, signals, calls, anything like that, he was open about it. He said, I gave everything, all the signs, everything I got from the Titans. I didn't hold back. I gave everything to the Eagles because that team didn't change anything. So say what you will about that. That's an absolute reality in the league, that when you acquire a player from another team, yeah, that player is probably a little salty, that especially if it was a trade, that they got moved, and they're looking to help their new team as well as probably give it to their previous team. Just, not often does it get verbalized like that. But A.J. Brown kind of taking shots at the Titans there, saying that they don't change their signals, they don't do anything. So yeah, I gave it all to the Eagles. All right, so now to the stuff that we're going to be focusing on primarily in this week's episode. And I just figure it's got to be a little bit of a heavy Jake Paul episode. The guy stirs up so much controversy. I say you love him or you hate him. I feel like naturally most people kind of hate this guy. I don't know how I feel about him. It was a couple of his fights ago that I sort of maybe am starting to come over to the other side a little bit. I still don't know exactly how I feel because I don't love the way he acts. But listen, the guy has now proved that he's fully switched over and is legitimately committed to being a real boxer and trying to push further and further. And he said it recently on an interview with Ariel Helwani, that he wants to be a world champion. He's not just in it to fight influencers or fight former, mixed martial artists or just former athletes in general, which I know he's done so far, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But you kind of have to start respecting this guy, especially when you see everything that he posts. Obviously, he's a businessman, but he absolutely seems fully committed. And like I said, love him or hate him, the guy's getting better. He absolutely, absolutely is getting better. So now we finally get to see him against, quote unquote, a real boxer. That's what everyone's been saying since he had his first win. I'll fight a real boxer. Oh, you're just fighting these old guys. Oh, you're just fighting retired athletes. And say what you will about it, you got to build yourself up a little bit. The only difference is that most boxers, when they're building themselves up, you have no idea who they are, so you can't really criticize who they fight. But Jake, we know the story. Goes through Nate Robinson. Everyone says you're going to get knocked out. You're fighting a real athlete. And he knocks out Nate Robinson, and then here comes the criticism. He's not a real boxer. He can't fight. Even though Jake's coming from YouTube and he seemingly can fight. Then he makes his way over to Ben Askren. Oh, now you're fighting a real fighter, but he was a wrestler. He was maybe the worst striker in the UFC and in ONE and in Bellator and every other organization he was in. Gets the win there. Next up to Tyron Woodley, blah, blah, blah. Most recently, we get to Anderson Silva. And he keeps beating these guys. He's 6-0, and it's slowly getting better and better as far as competition goes. But there's still always something you can pick at as to why it was easy or why he picked that. With Anderson Silva, he was a great striker, but he was old. Tyron Woodley was a former champion, but he had lost like 5 or 6 straight fights, and he seemingly didn't really seem like he wanted to be in there in his previous fights. So now he's fighting a real boxer, right? Tommy Fury. It's a great move for him. He's got the Fury last name, half-brother of Tyson Fury, the heavyweight champion of the world. So at face value, it looks like, okay, he's finally putting himself up to the challenge now. Well, let me bring it back down for you for a second here. Jake Paul's 6-0. Tommy Fury is 8-0. So the experience, Tommy's been a boxer the whole time fighting boxers. But he's not really that much more experienced than Jake is. And then if you look, say what you want about Jake's resume so far and how, he hasn't really fought anybody. I hate to break it to you guys. Tommy Fury's list of opponents, I'll go through them one by one. His first win came against a guy who had 10 wins, 102 losses, and 3 draws. Okay, well, that was his first fight. Okay, well, his second win, 0 wins, 26 losses, 2 draws. I mean, these are guys, you wonder why they keep getting in the ring. Third win, 2 wins, 26 losses. Fourth win, 0 wins, 11 losses. Fifth win, 0 wins, 9 losses. You see where this is going? He doesn't have the most hyped up resume either. The combined record lifetime of all of Tommy Fury's opponents, 24 wins, 176 losses, and 5 draws. So, he's a real boxer. But has he ran through some top tier competition? Has he proven himself as a legitimate boxer? Not any more than Jake Paul has. So Sunday, February 26th, that's when these two are set to go at it, to see, who's the better man and finally get in the ring after all the times this fight was booked. Jake had an interesting comment that he said in an interview. Everyone thinks this is, like I said it before, Jake finally stepping up and fighting a real boxer. The pressure's on him. Can he really beat a real boxer? Jake seems to think that it's the opposite. Jake thinks that this is Tommy's first real fight against him. That everyone else Tommy has fought haven't been any real competition, and that this is his first time really stepping up to the plate and fighting a real fighter aka himself, Jake Paul. Not only that, but there's no doubt Jake is a bigger draw than Tommy. Jake's a bigger draw than anyone Tommy's ever faced, so the lights are going to be brighter, the pressure is going to be higher, especially since his own father, Tommy Fury's father that is, John Fury, has said that, and was it John Fury or Tyson Fury, or both of them, basically it came together and said that if Tommy can't beat Jake, that they're going to retire him from boxing themselves, and other things, other crazy things along the lines of, he's not fit to carry the Fury name if he loses to Jake Paul. The kind of things that, add a ton of pressure, especially if you are considered the real boxer going up against a guy who, even though he's primarily been boxing for years now, most people still consider a YouTuber. So boxer versus YouTuber, if you lose, your family's basically disowning you. They're saying you can't really box anymore. I mean, the pressure, I think, is way higher for Tommy Fury than it is for Jake. If Jake loses, okay, everyone will hate on him because they want to hate on him, but you lost to a real boxer. You fought someone who's closer to your age, that's closer to their prime, that's been boxing longer than you have, that's got a kind of bloodline, a family heritage of boxing. It's not going to be the end of the world if Jake loses. And another thing, in a press conference that they had, Jake made a bet with Tommy, saying that if Tommy beats Jake, Jake's going to pay Tommy twice as much money. And conversely, if Jake beats Tommy, Tommy gets nothing. And in the press conference, if you saw it, Tommy Fury was kind of acting cool, dancing around it. Jake was waiting for an answer. Do you accept the deal or not? And Tommy's father, who was sitting next to him, stepped in for him and said, "You've got a deal." So, listen, I'm not a pro boxer. I'm not getting in under those lights. I'd be scared. That's all that's all I have to say about that. Now, I should have prefaced this episode by saying, just by the nature of the Morning Brew, it only comes out once a week. So this is actually going to come out after you guys have seen the fight. So you're kind of getting a little before, what I think what I think of the fight before it actually happens. But you guys are going to see it after the fact. So I guess it'll be funny to see, am I on with any of this analysis? Am I way off? It'll be fun for me to look back at and find out, and fun for you guys to tear me apart if I'm wrong. But either way, we'll address it next week, depending on how my predictions go. Jake Paul said that this is a must knockout for him. So he's putting a bit of pressure on himself too. He was asked, I know you guys don't like each other. Do you think you're going to knock him out? And he basically said that this is a must knockout win for me. I'll be upset if I don't knock him out. I think I'm going to beat him, but I know I can knock him out, and I won't be satisfied unless I do. I wanted to talk a little bit more about Jake Paul himself and sort of what he laid out as, as his upcoming plans, not only for this fight, but what follows this fight, because it gets pretty interesting. Jake Paul, a couple months ago, some people forget, he signed a deal with the PFL, the Professional Fighting League, and that's MMA, that's mixed martial arts. So it seems like he is going to be crossing over to mixed martial arts at some point. And he says he thinks he's got an opponent lined up. He thinks it's Nate Diaz. Now, Diaz, as we know, longtime UFC fighter, huge draw. He's had huge fights against Conor McGregor. Everyone wants to watch Nate Diaz. He's so funny to watch, in the press conferences. He's so authentic. He is who he is, and it's really a great, it's must-watch TV if you're a fight fan. So Jake seems to think that it's almost a done deal that after Tommy Fury, he's going to be fighting Nate Diaz, and that doesn't necessarily mean that's his fight in the PFL. Jake said that what he wants is to do one fight in boxing and then one fight in the mixed martial arts cage, in an MMA cage. And he wants Nate Diaz to be his opponent for that. So he wants to start it off boxing, give himself some more time, to train mixed martial arts, because there's a lot more you got to know for that. Obviously, he believes in his boxing, and he was a college wrestler, but he had said he thinks the jiu-jitsu's coming along nicely, but he needs to learn the kicks. Out of his mouth, he says, I just got to catch up with the kicks, which is tough, but he's working towards it. So he kind of laid out a plan. As for 2024, at some point in the next year, for him to finally make his debut in MMA, which I think gives him a good timeline to get through this fight, train, recover, do his other business stuff, then get back into the ring, ideally in his mind against Nate Diaz, boxing. I'm sure he hopes he beats him there, and then early 2024, sometime in 2024, he makes his walk into the octagon, and for it to be Nate Diaz as well, which, by the way, is a good matchup for him if you're talking about good matchups in regards to Diaz has great, submission threats and is a really good jiu-jitsu guy, but really has no interest in taking fights to the ground. Diaz is willing to stand there and strike with you. He's not really known as a heavy power guy, more as a volume guy and a guy that really can't get knocked out. So is it a good matchup for Jake? Not necessarily, but you know what I mean. In regards to he's not getting in there with a wrestler or an elite submission artist that's just going to expose Jake's flaws. I think Nate's going to be really willing to stand there and strike with Jake, which is exactly what he wants. And then after that, we're talking about potentially getting that boxing match with KSI, which in the influencer boxing world seems sort of like the pinnacle of everything, right? Because KSI and Jake's brother Logan Paul really started this whole thing, or really put it on the map, right? They fought twice. One of them was a draw. The second time KSI gets the better of Logan. They were kind of at each other's necks, for following for years. And now they're actually business partners with the Prime Energy drink, which is now a sponsor of the UFC. But either way, Jake, in the meantime, sort of built himself up, was getting wins, while Logan was the headline. And Jake sort of took over as the influencer boxer. Meanwhile, KSI was away from it for a while after beating Logan, and then came back and started to rack up wins himself. So KSI, sort of the big influencer boxer out in the UK. Jake Paul, the same thing here in North America. And it seems like that would be the pinnacle of influencer boxing, as I said. KSI said that's the only reason he came back. He wants to kind of train up, get some wins, and then get to Jake. He hates Jake. He wants nothing to do with Jake, but he hates Jake. And he kind of wants to kick his ass. He thinks he beat Logan, and now he wants a shot at Jake. And Jake kind of thinks that he's kind of brushing it off. He thinks he'll be able to run through KSI. He said in an interview that he wants KSI to fight Tyron Woodley first, because KSI mentioned Woodley might be a potential opponent for him. Jake doesn't seem to think KSI can get past Woodley. Either way, I would love to see these two go at it. Almost like Jake trying to avenge his brother. As for Logan, what side do you pick? You're a business partner with KSI and now seemingly pretty good friends, but you can't go against your brother, right? What happens if KSI beats Jake? What do you do? So it's pretty exciting content. And as I said to start the Jake Paul conversation, love him or hate him, it's must-watch TV. And it seems like he's got a pretty interesting next year to 2 years lined up. Okay, so I think I talk about this every week, but until the fight's over, I'm going to keep talking about it. And then I'll probably talk about it for a week once it's over. Jon Jones. Listen, he's been off for too long. Okay, it's been years. Arguably, I think it'd be hard to make an argument that he's not the greatest ever, that he hasn't had the greatest resume. I know as of late, you haven't seen him. He's been out of sight, out of mind. His past couple wins weren't necessarily the most dominant wins, the same way that, Khabib went out when he was retired, if you want to make the argument that he's the greatest ever. But regardless, Jon Jones is back. March 4th is going to be when he makes his walk to the octagon. It'll be against Cyril Gane. Cyril Gane, who was running through heavyweights, undefeated, made his way to the heavyweight title, challenged Francis Ngannou, and was having success in that fight until Francis sort of took advantage of Gane on the ground. And we kind of realized that Gane maybe doesn't have so much of a ground game, which bodes probably not great for him in regards to fighting Jon Jones. Although Jon historically has wanted to beat his opponents at their own game, which if you're fighting Cyril Gane means you're going to stand and strike with him, which I don't think is a smart idea if you're Jon Jones. Now, can he do it and win like that? He's absolutely capable. I mean, he's the greatest of all time. He's overcome literally every challenge he's ever faced. The one loss on his resume when he beat a guy up too bad that it was a disqualification. Yes, he broke the rules with the 12-6 elbow, but you know what I mean. He never lost a fight. And then he's got one disqualification on his resume where he head kicked Daniel Cormier, knocked him out to win the title back after being off for so long again. Now, okay, sure, substance abuse. Was he on steroids? That's why that was a disqualification. Whatever you want to say. But the talent's undeniable. He seemingly has cleaned up his act in regards to that side of steroids and whatever it is in the party, the way he used to party. And he's put on a ton of weight now. We don't know how he's going to look. What's he going to weigh for this fight? My guess would be he'll probably walk into the octagon 230 something. I can't imagine him being 250, because he was a lean light heavyweight, right? I know he put on a ton of size, but you got to think once he goes through the training camp, once he gets himself in really, really tip-top shape, I'd say probably 235-ish. And then Cyril Gane is 245 ripped and the fastest moving heavyweight I think the UFC's ever seen. And Jon in his last fight seemed to be a little bit slower than a guy in Dominic Reyes who hasn't had the most success since. So is he going to be slow for Cyril Gane? Or is Cyril going to be too fast for him? How's it going to go on the feet? Will he take him down to the ground? Because if Jon gets him down, that's the clear path to victory for Jon Jones. Now, the reason we're talking about this fight now was because there was more information, right? It's not just that I want to keep talking about the same things. Something new came to light, and it was Cyril Gane admitting that he doesn't train until a fight's announced. So from the moment he walks out of the octagon after a fight until the next time a poster comes out with his face on it and someone else's face that a fight's announced, this guy doesn't go in a gym. He doesn't train. Which, for a professional fighter, someone who's one of the best in the world, someone who's challenging for you, who has challenged for UFC title, that seems kind of crazy, no? I mean, there's two ways you can look at this. You can look at it as, wow, he really is that good? That he doesn't train in between fights and he's still doing what he's doing in the octagon? Or you can look at it as, how much better would he be if he did train year-round? And is that going to hurt him going forward? Because like I said, the clear path to victory for Jon Jones, take it to the ground, wrestle him. Francis Ngannou out-wrestled this guy, and Francis does not wrestle. He would much prefer to stay standing. So if your deficiency is ground game, wrestling, and you're not training in between fights, did he get any better on the ground? Because he's going in there against one of the greatest wrestlers in UFC history, in Jon Jones. And by the way, Cyril Gane is favored to win this fight. So if you're a betting man or a betting woman, do what you will with that information. Do you think it's going to be too much for Jon going up to heavyweight? Is he just not going to be strong enough? Is he going to be slow now? Is Gane really going to walk around him and pick him apart and just have his way with him? Or is he going to continue to do what he's done since he's like 23 years old after he broke the record and was the youngest man ever to win a UFC title? By the way, has never fought in a non-title fight since then, which is insanity. Is Jon Jones going to do the only thing we've ever seen him do and win? I'm just saying, plus money on Jon Jones. I might be hitting that button.